Right now, in this very moment, you are making a choice that will echo through the rest of your life. You're choosing to depend on others for your happiness, your validation, your very sense of worth, or you're choosing to become the architect of your own destiny. Raise your hand if you've ever changed your mind about something important because someone else disagreed with you. Keep it up. Look around. Most of you have your hands raised, and those who don't are lying to themselves. This is the uncomfortable truth we must face. Most people are emotional slaves to others' opinions. You wake up in the morning, and before you've even brushed your teeth, you're already wondering what people will think about your choices today. What will they think about your clothes, your ideas, your dreams? You've handed over the keys to your emotional state to people who barely think about you at all. And here's the brutal reality. They're too busy worrying about what others think of them to give your life the attention you think they're giving it. But this dependency comes with a hidden cost that's bankrupting your potential. Every time you seek approval, you're admitting that someone else's opinion matters more than your own judgment. Every time you modify your behavior to please the crowd, you're teaching yourself that you can't be trusted with your own decisions. Every time you choose what's popular over what's right, you're building a prison made of other people's expectations. Think about this. When was the last time you sat alone with your thoughts for an hour without reaching for your phone, without calling someone, without finding some way to connect with another human being? When did you last make a decision, any decision, without consulting someone else first? If you can't remember, you've discovered why you feel so powerless in your own life. The crowd makes you weak because it offers you the illusion of strength through numbers while robbing you of the real strength that comes from self-reliance. When you're alone, you must face yourself. You must confront your fears, your doubts, your excuses. You must decide what you truly believe, not what sounds good at dinner parties. You must choose what you actually want, not what others expect you to want. Solitude reveals who you really are beneath all the masks you wear to please others. And most people are terrified of this revelation because they've spent so long being who others wanted them to be that they've forgotten who they actually are. Let me tell you about Sarah, a woman who discovered this truth in the most painful way possible. For 37 years, she lived her life as a masterpiece of people-pleasing. She chose her career because her parents approved. She married a man because her friends thought he was perfect for her. She lived in a house she didn't like, in a neighborhood that impressed others, driving a car that looked successful to her colleagues. Sarah had achieved everything that looked like success from the outside, but every morning she stared at herself in the mirror and felt empty. She had built a beautiful life that belonged to everyone except her. She was successful by every external measure, and miserable by the only measure that truly mattered, her own. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Sarah was sitting in her perfectly decorated living room, surrounded by photos of her perfect life, when she realized she couldn't remember the last time she had made a decision based purely on what she wanted. Not what was expected, not what was practical, not what would make others happy, just what she genuinely desired. That night, Sarah did something she hadn't done in decades. She turned off her phone, ignored the emails, canceled her dinner plans, and sat alone with herself. For the first time in years, she asked herself what she actually wanted from life. The answer that came back surprised her. She wanted to write. She had always wanted to write, but had dismissed it because it wasn't practical, because others had convinced her it wasn't a real career, because she was afraid of what people would think. For the next 6 months, Sarah began the most important experiment of her life. She started making decisions without consulting anyone. Small decisions at first: what to eat for breakfast, which route to take to work, how to spend her Saturday morning. Then bigger ones. She started writing every evening instead of watching television. She began declining social events that drained her energy. She stopped explaining her choices to others. The most remarkable thing happened. As Sarah stopped seeking approval, people began to respect her more, not less. As she stopped trying to please everyone, she became more interesting, more magnetic, more authentic. Within a year, she had written her first novel. Within 2 years it was published. Today, 5 years later, she's a successful author, living exactly the life she wants, not the life others wanted for her. But here's what Sarah learned that changed everything. The moment she stopped asking, "What will people think?" her entire world transformed. She realized that most people are so consumed with their own concerns, their own insecurities, their own need for approval, that they barely notice your choices at all. The audience you think is watching your every move is largely an illusion created by your own fear. This brings us to a question that will determine the trajectory of your life. What would you do if you knew that no one was watching? What would you choose if you knew that no one would judge you, no one would criticize you, no one would even have an opinion about your decision? Stop for a moment and really consider this. What career would you pursue? What relationships would you end or begin? What dreams would you chase? What changes would you make to your life if the only person whose approval you needed was your own?
The fear that drives our need for approval is the same fear that keeps us trapped in mediocrity. We're afraid that if we stand alone, we'll discover we're not enough. We're afraid that our own judgment isn't trustworthy. We're afraid that without the crowd's validation, we'll somehow cease to exist.
But this fear is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how strength works. Real strength doesn't come from being supported by others. It comes from being able to support yourself. Real confidence doesn't come from others believing in you. It comes from you believing in yourself, regardless of what others think. Nature designed you to be complete within yourself. You were born with everything you need to make good decisions, to find your own way, to create meaning and purpose in your life. Every other living creature operates from this principle of self-reliance. A tree doesn't ask other trees permission to grow toward the sun. A river doesn't consult with other rivers about which path to take to the sea. Yet somehow human beings have convinced themselves that they need constant external validation to function. We've created a culture of dependency where self-reliance is seen as selfishness, and independence is viewed with suspicion. But this cultural programming is stealing your power and keeping you trapped in a life that isn't truly yours. Here's the paradox that most people never understand. The less you need people, the more they respect you. The less you seek approval, the more approval you naturally receive. The more complete you become within yourself, the more attractive you become to others. This isn't manipulation. It's a natural law as reliable as gravity. When you're emotionally self-sufficient, you interact with others from a position of choice rather than need. You can offer genuine friendship instead of desperate attachment. You can love freely instead of possessively. You can contribute authentically instead of performing for acceptance. But breaking free from the approval addiction requires you to do something most people find terrifying. You must learn to be comfortable with disapproval. You must be willing to have people misunderstand you, disagree with you, even dislike you, and still maintain your inner peace. This doesn't mean becoming callous or dismissive of others' feelings. It means recognizing that you cannot control what others think of you, and that attempting to do so is a waste of energy that could be used for actually improving your life. It means understanding that some people will never approve of your choices, and that their disapproval says more about them than it does about you. Start practicing this immediately. Make one decision today without asking anyone's opinion. Choose something you want to do, and do it without explaining or justifying your choice to others. Notice the discomfort this creates. That discomfort is your approval addiction going through withdrawal. Pay attention to how often you preface your statements with phrases like, "I think maybe," or "this might be wrong but," or "I'm not sure but." These verbal tics reveal your unconscious need for others to validate your thoughts before you're willing to express them confidently. Start stating your opinions directly and clearly, without hedging or apologizing for having them. When someone asks why you made a particular choice, resist the urge to justify or explain. Simply say, "because it felt right to me," or "because I wanted to." You don't owe anyone an explanation for living your life according to your own judgment. The most successful people in any field share one common characteristic: they guard their alone time fiercely. They understand that solitude isn't isolation, it's your training ground for strength. It's where you develop the mental muscles that allow you to stand firm in your convictions when the crowd pressures you to conform. In solitude, you learn to trust your own thoughts. You develop the ability to be entertained by your own mind, to find wisdom in your own experience, to derive strength from your own character. You stop being afraid of silence, because you're no longer afraid of what you might discover about yourself in that silence. This is very different from isolation born of fear or rejection. Strategic withdrawal is a choice made from strength, not weakness. It's temporarily stepping away from external influences so you can hear your own inner more clearly. It's creating space for your own thoughts to develop without immediate input from others. When you've built this inner fortress of self-reliance, something remarkable happens. You stop being swayed by every opinion, every criticism, every piece of advice that comes your way. You develop the ability to consider input from others without being controlled by it. You can take what serves you and leave what doesn't, all while maintaining your own center. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it begins the moment you decide that your own approval is the only approval you truly need. It accelerates when you start spending deliberate time alone, not because you have to, but because you choose to. It solidifies when you begin making decisions based on your own values rather than others' expectations. The foundation of inner power is this simple recognition: you came into this world alone, you will leave it alone, and everything that happens in between is ultimately your responsibility and your choice. When you accept this truth completely, you stop being a victim of circumstances and start becoming the master of your fate. But accepting this responsibility is just the beginning. Once you've claimed your independence from the crowd's opinion, you have unlimited power to reshape yourself according to your own design. This is where the real work begins, the systematic transformation of who you are into who you want to become. What if everything you need is already within you, quietly waiting for permission? Not permission from the world, but from you.
That moment when you stop searching outside and start turning inward is not some cliché idea, it's the beginning of your rebirth. The moment when something shifts, not loudly, not with fireworks, but in the quiet defiance of a person who's simply tired of carrying a version of themselves that was never truly theirs. You begin to notice how much of your life has been shaped by reaction, not intention. The opinions you swallowed, the dreams you shelved, the silence you kept because speaking felt dangerous. And suddenly, you're not just aware, you're restless. You feel the weight of 1,000 compromises, and something in you refuses to carry them anymore.
You start to walk differently, not because your feet are lighter, but because your steps are no longer guided by fear. You realize your past has had its hands around your throat for years, and you're no longer interested in giving it that power. So you start cutting ties, not to people but to identities. Versions of yourself built from expectations, built from pain, built from survival. You begin the slow, brutal work of becoming real. At first it's chaotic. You don't know what's true yet, only what isn't. But that's enough. That's everything. You stop performing. You stop proving. You let the noise fall away. And in that stillness, you meet yourself, not the self others see, but the self you buried because you didn't think it would be loved. And here's where the alchemy begins, not with a spark, but with a collapse. The collapse of every lie you've told yourself to feel safe. You realize growth doesn't always feel empowering. It often feels like grief. Because you're not just building a new you, you're mourning all the false selves that got you here. That's the paradox of transformation. It's not always beautiful at first. Sometimes it looks like isolation, like doubt, like getting up every day feeling lost but still showing up. That's real courage, to walk towards something you can't yet name, only because you know you can't keep living the way you have. People won't always understand. They'll ask why you're pulling back, why you're not as agreeable, why you no longer smile when something inside you screams. But that's okay. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to understand yourself, to rebuild you from the ground up, even if it shakes when you speak. You stop shrinking to fit into small rooms. You stop negotiating your value for a seat at the wrong tables. You remember what it felt like to be alive before the world taught you to be afraid of your own light, and slowly you begin choosing differently. Not just what you do, but who you are while doing it. You start becoming someone your past self wouldn't even recognize. And not because you're faking, but because you're finally being honest. Your anger softens into clarity. Your sadness becomes fuel. Your fear becomes a compass, not a cage. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to stop letting fear drive. Every choice becomes an initiation. Saying no when it costs you. Saying yes when it scares you. Walking away from comfort to walk toward alignment. You stop asking for permission to change. You just change. Quietly, fiercely, consistently. And one day, it's not so hard to say what you feel, to stand where you once hid, to look in the mirror and not see a project or a failure or a mask, but a person, whole, flawed, becoming. You begin to realize that self-worth is not something you find, it's something you reclaim. It was never lost, only buried under layers of guilt, shame and conditioning. People start saying you've changed. They say it like an accusation, but to you it sounds like freedom. You didn't come this far to stay the same. You didn't break cycles just to repeat them with nicer words. You're not trying to be perfect, you're trying to be true. And truth doesn't always come wrapped in acceptance. Sometimes it comes wrapped in solitude. In endings you didn't want but needed. In grief that becomes your teacher. You learn to sit with yourself through it all. Not to fix but to feel. To stop running from the ache, and finally ask it what it's here to show you. That's the fire that forges something new. Not the fire that burns everything down out of anger, but the fire that clears what no longer fits so you can finally breathe. You stop asking the world to make space for you and start creating your own. You realize you don't need to be more of anything, not more confident, not more successful, not more desirable. You just need to be more you, and that means stripping away the layers that never belonged in the first place, the masks, the performances, the constant adjusting. You remember who you were before the world told you who to be, before you became obsessed with achievement or attention, before your value was measured by productivity or praise. That version of you, the quiet one, the wild one, the soft one, is still there. And now you're strong enough to protect them. You stop seeing failure as a reflection of your worth, and start seeing it as information. You failed? Good. That means you tried. That means you're in the game. That means you're moving. The opposite of failure isn't success, it's staying stuck. And when you stop being afraid to be seen, you start radiating something unshakable. Not perfection, not control, but honesty. And people feel that. They may not always like it, but they feel it. And that presence, that self-trust, that's the thing no one can give you and no one can take away. You begin to understand that healing isn't linear, that sometimes you'll grow and regress in the same breath, that some lessons repeat, not because you're weak, but because you're going deeper this time. And every time you come back to them, you meet them with more wisdom, more clarity, more strength.
You forgive yourself, not because everything you did was okay, but because holding on to shame no longer serves who you're becoming. You learn the difference between accountability and self-punishment, between self-discipline and self-betrayal, between peace and people-pleasing. You stop pretending that emotional numbness is maturity, that keeping quiet is strength, that suppressing your truth makes you easier to love. The more real you are with yourself, the less tolerance you have for anything fake. You stop needing approval and start trusting your instincts.
And somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, you become the version of you that your younger self would cry happy tears to meet. Not because you're rich or successful, but because you're finally safe inside yourself. You don't abandon yourself anymore. You don't apologize for your standards. You no longer shrink to be digestible. You understand now that boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to real connection. And love doesn't ask you to leave yourself behind. It meets you in your wholeness. You no longer chase people who need convincing of your worth. You walk with those who already see it. You see now that your life was never meant to look like anyone else's. And the more you try to copy someone else's blueprint, the more disconnected you feel. The map was inside you the whole time, but it only reveals itself when you stop performing and start listening. This is where it all begins. Not in the moment everything makes sense, but in the moment you stop pretending it does. In the space between what was and what will be, where all you have is you. That's where transformation happens. Quietly, relentlessly, honestly. And as you keep moving forward, you start noticing something else. It's not just about becoming, it's about remembering who you are, what matters, why you're here. You don't need a new identity. You need to return to the parts of you that always knew. The silence starts feeling like peace, not punishment. The solitude feels sacred, not lonely. You're no longer rushing to the next thing. You're living this moment fully, no longer obsessed with fixing everything, but present enough to feel it. And in that presence, everything begins to shift. Because the most radical thing you can do is be yourself, fully, loudly, unapologetically, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's misunderstood. Especially then, because that's when you know it's real. And the more real you become, the less room there is for anything that isn't. The fake smiles, the forced conversations, the roles you never asked for. You begin to shed it all. Not because you're better, but because you're finally free. And freedom, it's not some grand declaration. It's 1,000 small choices, each one saying, I trust myself now. And from that trust, everything begins to rebuild. Stronger, wiser, cleaner. You stop asking for proof that you're enough. You just are. What keeps repeating in your life? That same emotion, that same mistake, that same kind of person with a different face. It's not a coincidence, it's a pattern. And patterns don't lie. They expose what still needs your attention, your responsibility, your courage. You can't fix what you won't face. And most people spend their entire lives running from the very thing that would set them free. Every problem that keeps showing up is trying to teach you something. Not punish you, teach you. It's never just about the other person. It's never just about the situation. It's always a mirror. That's the hard truth. The same kind of heartbreak, the same argument in different relationships, the same fear in new opportunities. It keeps circling back until you stop looking outward and start asking, what part of me is still living on autopilot? Mastery begins the moment you stop blaming circumstances and start decoding them. You don't need more motivation. You need clarity. Why do you keep betraying yourself? Why do you tolerate what breaks you? Why do you keep hiding behind overthinking when action is the only way forward? The greatest prison is a mind addicted to its old patterns. You say you want peace, but you keep choosing chaos because it's familiar. You say you want growth, but you keep clinging to comfort. You say you want transformation, but refuse to let go of the identity built from your wounds. You can't become unstoppable if you keep rehearsing your limits like they're facts. They're not. They're just old habits with too much power. Start questioning the stories. The ones that say you're too late, too broken, too flawed. Who told you that? And why are you still repeating it? No one ever broke you so badly that you lost your worth. But the repetition of that pain taught you to forget it. Now it's time to unlearn. That's the work. To meet your patterns without shame. To look at your reactions and ask, is this the best version of me, or is this survival? You don't break cycles by pretending you're okay. You break them by being brutally honest about what needs to change, even when it hurts. You stop calling it just how I am, and start calling it what it is, programming. And programming can be rewritten, but only if you're willing to trade your excuses for execution. Most people are waiting for a perfect moment, a perfect plan. But power doesn't wait. It's built in the mess, in the uncertainty, in the repetition of difficult choices made anyway. To master life, you have to master yourself. And to master yourself, you have to know what drives you. Fear or truth. Every decision, every reaction, every habit is either coming from protection or purpose.
Are you running from something or building something? Are you avoiding pain or choosing alignment? The difference between repeating and rising is awareness. And awareness without action becomes just another comfort zone. You can know what's wrong, you can understand the wound, but until you start doing something different, you'll keep circling the same mountain, convincing yourself it's progress because the view slightly changed. Your potential isn't some distant dream, it's buried underneath layers of avoidance. Every time you break a toxic pattern, even once, you shift everything. You rewire your brain, you build new evidence, you show yourself that change is real. That's how momentum is born, not in loud victories, but in quiet defiance.
You stop being available for drama. You stop answering calls from your past. You stop chasing people who drain you. And most importantly, you stop choosing the version of yourself that keeps the peace at the cost of your soul. You're not here to be digestible. You're here to be real. So you start observing, not judging, just observing. When you feel triggered, when you want to react. And in that space, ask yourself, is this who I want to be? The more you ask, the clearer the answer becomes. You stop moving through life unconsciously and start living with precision. Precision is power. Clarity is power. You don't need a bigger vision, you need better focus. Stop scattering your energy. Stop doing 1,000 things halfway. Choose one pattern and break it. Then another, then another. That's how you become unstoppable. Not all at once, but one decision at a time. You'll notice people treating you differently. Some will respect it, some will resent it. That's none of your business. You're not responsible for how others react to your evolution. You're responsible for staying aligned with it. Growth costs comfort. It costs approval. It costs being liked by everyone. But the reward, it's peace, it's power, it's self-respect that no one can touch. You stop performing strength and actually start living it. Not by being hard, but by being clear. Saying no without guilt. Walking away without drama. Setting boundaries without needing to explain yourself. That's not coldness. That's control. That's self-leadership. You realize your life doesn't change by getting rid of all your flaws. It changes by refusing to be led by them. Even your darkness has value when it's faced. Anger becomes passion. Fear becomes wisdom. Shame becomes humility. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be conscious. You start looking at your past not as a prison, but as training. Every betrayal taught you where not to compromise. Every rejection showed you your resilience. Every failure shaped your precision. Nothing was wasted. Not the heartbreak, not the confusion, not the silence. It all pointed you toward mastery. And here's the truth. Most of the battles you think are with others are actually with yourself. Your self-doubt, your need for validation, your fear of being misunderstood. You win those battles by no longer needing anything external to validate your worth. You're not needy, you're growing. And growth feels lonely at times because it requires letting go. Letting go of people who only loved your old version. Letting go of environments that normalize dysfunction. Letting go of patterns that once protected you but now limit you. At first it feels like loss, but soon it feels like liberation. You stop gaslighting yourself into staying small. You stop negotiating your standards. You no longer shrink in rooms that can't handle your fullness. You walk in truth, not for applause but for peace. Peace is power, and once you taste it, chaos becomes intolerable. You begin to recognize peace not just in stillness, but in decisions, in boundaries, in self-discipline, in refusing to argue with people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop explaining your evolution. You start embodying it. Your life speaks louder than any explanation ever could. People may not understand it, but they feel it, and the ones meant for you will rise to meet you there. You realize consistency matters more than intensity. Anyone can get motivated. Few can stay disciplined. Discipline means doing what aligns with your highest self, especially when it's hard, especially when no one's watching, especially when the old you screams for attention. You stop chasing motivation and start building rituals, morning rituals, thought rituals, behavioral rituals. Because what you repeat, you become, and the more intentional your habits, the more predictable your progress. Success isn't some magical moment, it's a pattern of small actions repeated with focus, a pattern of facing discomfort instead of running, a pattern of choosing growth over ease. You want unstoppable, build unstoppable habits, habits that align with your vision, not your fear. You stop getting distracted by things that don't matter. You stop giving energy to things that drain you. You start measuring your day by your alignment, not your to-do list. You don't chase time, you command it. You use it to build, to heal, to grow, and you become dangerous, not to others, but to everything that once limited you, to every excuse, every fear, every past version of you that thought you couldn't. You prove them wrong. Every day, quietly, relentlessly. You stop being motivated by pain
and start being led by purpose. You stop reacting to life and start responding to it with precision. You see challenges as invitations, not threats. You don't break under pressure, you become sharper. The people who used to trigger you no longer hold power. The environments that once drained you no longer define you. You don't need permission to shine, you are the light, not because you're better than anyone, but because you finally remembered who you are without the noise. You've trained for this. Every moment of doubt, every tear you wiped in silence, every morning you got up when quitting felt easier. It all brought you here, not just to survive, but to lead, not just to heal, but to build, not just to rise, but to stay risen. You now walk differently, not out of arrogance, but clarity. You're not chasing anymore. You're creating, you're choosing, you're responding. You don't need to be louder, you need to be rooted, in truth, in values, in your own damn power, and that's what makes you unstoppable. Not that you're fearless, but that you keep moving forward, even with fear in your lungs and uncertainty in your bones. You keep showing up, keep adjusting, keep evolving, and the world starts shifting in response, not because the world changed, but because you did.